Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to witness grand battles or royal intrigue, but to experience the quiet, often overlooked world of a medieval scribe. Prepare to immerse yourself in a day so monotonous, so painstakingly detailed, you might just find your eyelids getting wonderfully heavy. It's a life of focused precision, where a misplaced speck of ink could ruin hours of work, and the most exciting event of the day might be successfully sharpening a quill without it splitting. Frankly, if you were suddenly transported back and handed a feather and some parchment, your modern, distraction-addled brain probably wouldn't last an hour before demanding a coffee break and a scroll through social media, neither of which, sadly, are on offer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world, so drop a comment below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first sensation is the cold. It's a deep, penetrating chill that seems to emanate from the very stones of the small dwelling you call home, a cold that has wormed its way through the rough wool of your blanket and into your bones. You lie still for a moment, curled tightly on your straw-filled pallet, reluctant to acknowledge the inevitable arrival of another day. There are no gentle alarm clocks here, no gradually lightening smart bulbs. Your summons is far more primal, perhaps the distant, muffled crow of a rooster valiantly trying to pierce the pre-dawn gloom, or if you're in a monastic setting, the solemn, clanging call of the matin's bell, an iron tongue speaking a language of duty and prayer that slices through the quiet. Historians still debate the exact hour most common folk, or even specialized artisans like you, would typically rise. It varied so greatly by season, by the urgency of the work, and by whether the sun itself had bothered to consider an appearance. For you, it's simply early. Too early. You shift, and the straw rustles beneath you, a dry, papery sound that's as familiar as your own breathing. It's not uncomfortable, not exactly. You're used to it. But there are always a few stray stalks that seem determined to make their presence known, poking insistently through the thin fabric of your tunic, the simple, knee-length garment you sleep in. Luxury might be a smoothly worn patch of straw, a temporary hollow that cradles you just so. You burrow your nose deeper into the blanket, a coarse, homespun thing that smells faintly of lanolin, wood smoke, and the faint, ever-present aroma of damp that clings to everything in this era. Slowly, tentatively, you extend a foot from beneath the covers. The air hits it like a splash of icy water, and you recoil for a second. This is the moment of decision, the daily battle between the fleeting comfort of your nest and the unyielding demands of your profession. The scriptorium waits for no one, and the pages you're tasked with copying won't fill themselves. With a sigh that condenses in the frigid air, a tiny, fleeting cloud in the darkness of your small chamber, you push the blanket aside. The floor, whether it's packed earth, rough-hewn wooden planks, or cold stone, is shockingly cold against your bare soles. You sit up, swinging your legs over the side of the pallet, and the chill wraps around you more completely. Your limbs are stiff, protesting the movement. You can hear the faint, rhythmic breathing of others nearby if you share your small living space, perhaps family members huddled together for warmth, or fellow monks in their cells, each beginning their own silent transition from sleep to wakefulness. The concept of personal space, as we know it, was quite different. Communal living was the norm for most, a fact well documented in household records and monastic rulebooks. Sharing warmth, sharing resources, it was all part of survival. Now, to dress. There's no flicking on a light switch. If the hearth in the main room still holds a few dying embers, a faint, ruddy glow might offer the barest hint of illumination. Otherwise, you're dressing by feel, your hands going to the familiar shapes of your clothes piled on a nearby chest or stool, the only pieces of furniture besides your bed. First, your brays, loose linen underdrawers, then the long chausses, or hose, which you'll tie to your belt. They're made of wool, most likely, offering some protection against the cold, though itchy is probably a more accurate descriptor by modern standards. You pull on another tunic, perhaps a slightly finer one than your sleep shirt, though the finer is a relative term. It's all about practicality and warmth. If it's particularly biting, you might add an overtunic or a small mantle. Every movement is an effort in the chill, your fingers fumbling slightly with ties and folds. You might pause, listening to the sounds of the world outside your immediate space. The wind, a constant companion in these less-than-airtight dwellings, might be whistling through cracks in the shutters or under the door, carrying with it the scent of damp earth or, if you're in a town, the less romantic smells of a medieval settlement waking up, wood smoke from early fires, distant animal noises, the faint tang of waste. It's a symphony of the era, one you're intimately familiar with. Hygiene, by 21st century standards, is, let's just say, efficient. A basin of water, likely fetched the night before and now numbingly cold, sits on the chest. If you're feeling particularly brave, you'll splash some on your face and hands. There's no fragrant soap, no running hot water, certainly no invigorating shower. The idea of a daily full-body wash was a luxury few could afford or even conceive of, especially in winter. A quick rub with a rough linen cloth, and you're considered ready to face the world. It's remarkable what humans can adapt to, isn't it? The grime was just a part of life, an extra layer, perhaps. If the darkness is still absolute, you'll need light. This means fumbling for your tinderbox, a small, precious possession containing flint, steel, and some dry tinder like charred linen or fungus. The act of striking a spark, nursing it into a tiny flame, and then transferring it to a sliver of wood or a rushlight dipped in tallow is a skill in itself, one often taken for granted but essential. A quirky little fact, some households, particularly poorer ones, might engage in borrowing fire from a neighbor whose hearth was still going, rather than go through the whole process themselves, carefully carrying embers in a covered pot. Whether a scribe, even one of modest means, would always have their own reliable fire-starting kit, or if they too sometimes relied on a neighbor's generosity or the communal hearth, is one of those small domestic details that sparks lively, if minute, discussions among social historians. Finally, a thin tallow candle or a sputtering rushlight casts its meager, flickering glow around your small space, pushing back the deepest shadows but doing little to dispel the cold. The light dances on the rough walls, perhaps made of wattle and daub or uneven stone, revealing the simplicity of your surroundings. It's just enough light to see your way, to gather your few essential belongings for the day ahead. You take a moment, a breath. The day stretches before you, a long corridor of focused effort. The scriptorium, with its particular scent of parchment, ink, and beeswax, awaits. The exemplar, the master text you're copying, sits patiently, its neat lines a silent challenge to your own skill and endurance. There's a weight to this moment, a quiet resignation mixed with a sense of purpose. The words you will painstakingly transcribe today might outlive you by centuries, carrying knowledge, stories, or laws into a future you can't possibly imagine. But that's a thought for later, perhaps. Right now, the most pressing concerns are the lingering chill in your fingers and the journey to your place of work. The demanding day has truly begun, ushered in not by a gentle sunrise, but by the raw, unyielding reality of a medieval morning. The cold is a constant companion, a reminder of the fragility of comfort, and the quiet sighs are not just of weariness, but of a deep, ingrained acceptance of the world as it is, a world where every meticulously formed letter is a small victory against the encroaching gloom. You can already feel the phantom ache in your shoulders, the anticipated strain in your eyes. But there's also a subtle thrum of readiness. This is your craft, your calling, your daily drudgery. And so, you prepare to meet it, one cold, deliberate step at a time. The faint light from your candle barely illuminates the path to the door, a small circle of familiarity in a world still largely asleep, or at least, pretending to be. The air you breathe is sharp, clean, and undeniably frigid, a stark contrast to the often stuffy, smoky interiors. Each exhalation is a visible plume, a fleeting testament to the life within you, ready to be poured onto the waiting page. You pull your mantle, if you have one, a little tighter around your shoulders, the rough wool a familiar comfort against the biting air. The small candle or rushlight you carry, assuming you're fortunate enough to have one to spare for the journey, casts a very small, very lonely circle of flickering orange light around your feet. It dances and sways with your movement, making the shadows leap and retreat like timid creatures. This tiny flame is your fragile shield against the overwhelming darkness of the pre-dawn world. It's precious, every flicker a reminder of the resources it consumes. Whether the average person on such an early journey would routinely carry their own light, or simply rely on a good memory, the faint glow of the moon and stars, if visible, and a healthy dose of luck, is something not always clear from the sparse records of daily life for ordinary folk. Stepping out from your dwelling, be it a small cottage at the edge of a village, a room within a bustling medieval town, or a cell within the quieter confines of a monastery, the change in atmosphere is immediate. The air outside is even colder, sharper, and it carries a whole new collection of scents. There's the damp earth, the lingering smell of wood smoke from countless hearths now reduced to embers, and, depending on your location and the direction of the wind, the less romantic but ever-present odors of a world without modern sanitation. Let's just say the phrase fresh morning air might have had a slightly different, more robust interpretation back then. You try to breathe shallowly through your mouth as you pass particularly fragrant spots. Your feet find the path. If it's a path. In the countryside or a small village, it might be little more than a worn track, muddy after rain, frozen into treacherous ruts in the deep cold. In a town, you might have the luxury of uneven cobblestones underfoot, slick with morning dew or a thin layer of frost. Either way, it's a journey that demands your full attention, especially in this meager light. Medieval roads and pathways, a mainstream fact often glossed over in tales of knights and castles, were generally in a sorry state. Paved streets were a luxury of prosperous cities, and even then, maintenance could be sporadic. For most, travel meant navigating uneven surfaces, mud, and all manner of debris. You walk with a careful, practiced gait, your senses heightened. Your ears pick up the scrabbling of a rat in a nearby thatch, the distant, mournful howl of a dog, or perhaps the snuffling of pigs. Ah, the pigs! In many medieval towns, these creatures roamed with a certain degree of freedom, acting as a kind of unofficial, four-legged sanitation crew, gobbling up refuse that would otherwise pile even higher in the streets. So, that dark shape you sidestep might not be a shadow, it could be a slumbering hog, or the fragrant evidence of its earlier passage. It adds a certain, organic obstacle course element to your morning commute. One could say it keeps you on your toes, quite literally. The darkness is profound. Away from the very heart of the largest cities, which might have had some rudimentary forms of public lighting like a lantern at a key gate or shrine, most places were plunged into absolute blackness once the sun went down. You learn to navigate by the silhouette of rooftops against the slightly less dark sky, by the feel of the ground beneath your feet, by the subtle echoes of your own footsteps. Your other senses compensate, painting a picture of the world around you in sounds and smells. It's a far cry from streetlights and illuminated shop windows. This is a darkness that feels ancient, a darkness that holds secrets and perhaps a touch of fear, though you're too accustomed to it for overt alarm. Are you alone on this pre-dawn trek? Perhaps. The world around you is mostly silent, wrapped in the deep slumber that precedes the true start of the day. But you might see other flickering lights in the distance, other early risers making their way to their own duties. A baker, perhaps, already heading to their ovens, the first faint, delicious scent of wood smoke and yeast beginning to tinge the air. Or a watchman, his shift ending, his footsteps heavy with fatigue as he heads for his own cold bed. If you're within monastic walls, you might hear the low murmur of distant chanting as the monks begin their early services, the sound a comforting, rhythmic pulse in the stillness. The sounds of your own passage are stark in the quiet. The crunch of your leather-soled shoes on frosty ground, the rustle of your woolen clothes, the small, almost metallic puff of your breath condensing in the air. Each sound seems amplified. You pass by darkened houses, their shutters tightly closed against the night and the cold. You might imagine the people huddled within, lost in dreams, oblivious to your solitary journey. There's a certain loneliness to it, but also a kind of peace. This is your time, a quiet interlude before the concentrated demands of the scriptorium begin. You might encounter a night soil man, one of those unsung heroes of medieval urban life, completing his rounds. Theirs was a truly thankless task, collecting human waste under the cover of darkness. The exact nature of street cleaning, if it existed at all in smaller towns or less organized urban areas, is a topic of ongoing scholarly discussion among historians. While larger cities had officials like rakers or scavengers tasked with removing refuse, their effectiveness and the general state of cleanliness, or lack thereof, varied immensely. For the most part, you be wise to watch where you step. If you are in a town, the streets are narrow, winding, hemmed in by tall, timber-framed houses that lean precariously towards each other, almost seeming to whisper secrets across the gap. These narrow thoroughfares can become wind tunnels, funneling the cold air directly at you. You pull your hood further over your head, tucking your chin down. Sometimes, a door will creak open, a sliver of light spilling out as someone else ventures forth. A brief, mumbled greeting might be exchanged, a curt nod, the quiet acknowledgement of shared hardship, of being awake and active while the world sleeps. A quirky, lesser-known tidbit is the origin of the word curfew. It comes from the old French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire. It was an order, often signaled by a bell, for fires to be covered or extinguished at a set time in the evening, partly to prevent accidental conflagrations in closely packed wooden towns, and partly for maintaining civic order. By this pre-dawn hour, the curfew would have long passed, but the covered fires mean less smoke and a deeper chill in the air. As you walk, your mind might drift. You might be mentally preparing for the text you're to copy today, recalling the intricate letter forms, the specific layout required. Or you might be thinking of something more mundane, whether the ink you mixed yesterday will be the right consistency, or if your favorite quill is due for another sharpening. These small, practical thoughts occupy the space, keeping at bay any anxieties about the long day of meticulous labor ahead. The air is still, heavy, and damp. It seeps into your clothes, making the wool feel heavier. You can taste it, a metallic tang of cold. If there was rain recently, the path might be a quagmire, and you'll be picking your way carefully to avoid the deepest puddles, your progress slow and deliberate. A slip here could mean a day spent in wet, freezing clothes, a truly miserable prospect, and one that could easily lead to illness. Remember, no convenient tumble dryers or spare sets of fine merino wool thermals. Getting soaked was a serious business. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the deepest black of the sky might begin to soften ever so slightly in the east, though the sun is still a long way off. It's more a feeling than a visible change, a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness. Or perhaps it's just wishful thinking. Your destination is getting closer. If you're headed to a monastery, the imposing stone walls might begin to loom out of the gloom, the rhythmic sound of the bells for lords perhaps growing louder, a solemn and beautiful sound that echoes in the still air, a call to prayer that has marked the hours for generations. You pass through a gate, the sound of your footsteps changing as you move from the rough track onto a more carefully maintained path within the cloister garth. If your scriptorium is in a town, perhaps attached to a cathedral or a university, or even a private workshop, you navigate the familiar labyrinth of streets. The smells might change slightly, perhaps the faint, savory aroma from a cookshop that caters to early workers, or the metallic tang from a blacksmith's forge, though it's likely too early for most of those to be fully active. You turn a corner, and there it is, the familiar door, the building that houses your daily labor. A sense of inevitability settles over you. The journey, with its small challenges and quiet observations, is over. The real work is about to begin. You take one last deep breath of the cold, murky air, and prepare to enter. You reach for the heavy wooden door of the scriptorium, perhaps iron-banded and studded, its surface cool and solid beneath your chilled fingertips. It groans a quiet protest as you push it inward, a sound that seems almost reverent in the pre-dawn stillness. Stepping across the threshold, you leave the raw, elemental world of the murky path behind and enter a space dedicated to silence, study, and the meticulous preservation of words. The air inside is different. It's still cold, make no mistake, the scriptorium is rarely, if ever, directly heated. The risk of fire to the priceless manuscripts and the vast quantities of flammable parchment is far too great. So, your main source of warmth will be your own body heat, the layers of wool you're wearing, and perhaps the sheer intensity of your concentration later in the day. Some might call it a state-of-the-art medieval climate control system, designed primarily for the books, not the scribes. You just call it cold. But the cold here feels drier, less damp than outside. It carries the unique perfume of this place, the faint, slightly sweet, and earthy scent of parchment, the subtle aroma of aged leather bindings, the sharp tang of iron gall ink, a hint of beeswax used for polishing writing tablets or sealing documents, and perhaps, if you are in a monastic scriptorium, the lingering ghost of incense from a nearby chapel. Your eyes, accustomed to the deeper gloom outside, slowly adjust. The scriptorium is a long, relatively narrow room, often, as a well-known historical fact confirms, situated on the north side of a monastery's cloister. This orientation provided more even, indirect light throughout the day, deemed essential for the painstaking work, and also helped keep the precious vellum and parchment from becoming too dry or, conversely, too damp and prone to mold. High, arched windows, probably unglazed or covered with translucent sheets of oiled linen or scraped horn rather than clear glass, which was an expensive luxury, might line one wall. At this hour, they are just pale rectangles against the darkness, offering no significant illumination yet. Any light within comes from carefully placed candles or oil lamps, casting pools of light on individual workstations, though their use would be strictly monitored. You see other figures moving like shadows in the dimness. Some are already seated, hunched over their desks, the faint scratching of a quill already audible if you listen intently. Others, like you, are just arriving, their movements quiet and deliberate. The defining characteristic of the scriptorium, even more than the cold or the smell, is the silence. It's not an empty silence, but a charged, purposeful quiet. In many monastic orders, a strict code of silence was enforced here. Talking was forbidden, or at the very least, severely restricted, to prevent errors in transcription and to maintain a contemplative atmosphere. If a modern library feels quiet, a medieval scriptorium would make it sound like a bustling marketplace by comparison. Communication, when absolutely necessary, might be conducted through a complex system of hand gestures. A quirky tidbit often mentioned by historians is the elaborate sign language developed by orders like the Cistercians, who observed particularly strict silence. They had signs for everything from book and parchment to specific liturgical texts or tools. For you, perhaps a simple nod or a raised eyebrow suffices for a greeting if you catch the eye of a fellow scribe. There's an unspoken understanding, a shared purpose that binds you together in this chilly, silent endeavor. You move towards your assigned spot. This might be a heavy, sloping wooden desk, known as a pluteus, perhaps shared with another scribe if space is tight. Or, if this scriptorium is well appointed, you might have a carrel, a small, partitioned alcove, sometimes built into the recesses of the windows, offering a sliver more privacy and perhaps slightly better light later in the day. You run a hand over the wooden surface of your desk. It's worn smooth by the hands and arms of countless scribes before you, generations of quiet labor etched into its very grain. You set down any small bundle you might be carrying, perhaps your meager midday meal wrapped in a cloth. Whether scribes were allowed any form of personal comfort items, like a small, rough cushion to soften the hard wooden bench, or a wrapped, heated brick for their feet, a risky proposition near flammable materials, is a detail often debated by those studying the practicalities of monastic daily life and manuscript production. For now, you accept the Spartan conditions as part of the work. Your gaze sweeps across the room. There's Brother Michael, already squinting at a large folio, his shoulders characteristically hunched. Over there is young Thomas, who still sometimes smudges his ink, his brow furrowed in concentration that you know will likely lead to a tension headache by noon. And at the head of the room, or in a designated office, sits the armarius. He is the keeper of the books, the master of the scriptorium, the one who assigns the tasks, distributes the materials, and inspects the finished work. He's a figure of authority, his approval sought, his criticism quietly absorbed. You could think of him as the medieval IT manager, holding the keys to all the essential software, or in this case, the precious exemplars. Now, to gather your tools and the day's assignment. You approach the armarius or the locked cupboard where the writing materials are stored. He might already have your next section of parchment and the exemplar, the master manuscript you are to copy, laid out for you. Or you may have to request it, perhaps with a specific gesture if speech is forbidden. The exemplar itself is handled with utmost care. It could be an ancient, revered text, its pages thin and fragile, its script perhaps faded or written in an archaic hand that will require all your skill to decipher accurately. Or it might be a more recent work, but no less valuable. Each manuscript represents an enormous investment of time and resources. You receive your allotment of parchment for the day. It's cool to the touch, its surface either smooth or slightly rough depending on the quality and preparation. This is your canvas, the blank slate upon which you will pour hours of effort. You also check your personal toolkit, which you might keep in a small wooden box or leather pouch. Your quills, goose, swan, or crow feathers need to be inspected. Is the nib still sharp, or will it need recutting? Your penknife, a small, sharp blade, is essential for this and for scraping away errors. You'll have a lead plummet or a silver point stylus for ruling lines, a ruler, often just a straight piece of wood or bone, and perhaps a pumice stone for smoothing the parchment further or for erasing stubborn marks. Your inkpot, likely a small horn or ceramic vessel, needs checking. Is the ink level sufficient? Is its consistency right, not too thick, not too watery? If you need fresh ink, that too might be obtained from the armarius or a central supply. The quiet hum of the scriptorium is beginning to solidify. It's a symphony of subtle sounds, the rustle of parchment, the almost inaudible scratch of quill on surface, the occasional soft cough, the distant clang of a church bell marking another prayer office. There's a palpable sense of focused energy in the room, a collective dedication to the task at hand. You return to your desk, your materials carefully arranged before you. The cold seeps into your bones, a familiar companion. You might rub your hands together briskly, blow on your fingertips, trying to coax some warmth into them before you begin the delicate work of preparing the page. The day is young, the light is still weak, but the scriptorium is awake, a silent engine of knowledge, and you are one of its vital, if often uncelebrated, components. The anticipation of the work mingles with the lingering chill of the morning, creating a unique sensation of readiness and resignation. The first task, before even a single letter is formed, will be the meticulous preparation of that blank parchment sheet, a ritual in itself. Before you can even think about dipping a quill into ink, before the first majestic capital or humble minuscule is formed, there is the parchment. You unroll the sheet assigned to you, or perhaps it's a bifolium, a larger piece folded to make 2 leaves, 4 pages. It lies there on your sloping desk, cool and slightly stiff, a pale expanse in the dim light of the scriptorium. This isn't paper, born from plant pulp, easily produced and readily available like your modern descendants might take for granted. This is skin. Animal skin. Usually sheep, goat, or if it's a particularly fine piece, calf skin, which produces the prized vellum. You run your fingers lightly over its surface. Each piece is unique, a testament to the creature it came from and the laborious process that transformed it. You can often distinguish the hair side, slightly rougher, perhaps with the faint pattern of follicles still discernible, from the smoother flesh side. The hair side tends to be a bit more yellow and can be more resistant to ink, while the flesh side is often whiter and more receptive. Scribes would, as a common practice, try to arrange their pages so that a flesh side faced another flesh side, and a hair side faced hair, throughout the finished book or quire, a subtle detail that maintained visual consistency. This sheet before you has already undergone a lengthy and, frankly, rather unpleasant journey to reach your desk. It was soaked in a lime solution to loosen the hair and fats, then painstakingly scraped clean of flesh and hair by parchment makers. After that, it was stretched taut on a wooden frame, a hearse, and scraped again and again with a curved knife as it dried under tension, a process that aligns the collagen fibers and creates its characteristic thinness and strength. This is a mainstream historical fact, the foundational process behind every medieval manuscript. It was smelly, messy, physical work, far removed from the quiet contemplation of the scriptorium. You, as the scribe, are receiving it at the tail end of this production line, but its history is embedded in its very texture. Your task now is the final, crucial preparation of this specific writing surface. Whether scribes themselves always undertook this final surface refinement, or if parchment sometimes arrived ready to write from specialized suppliers, likely varied depending on the scriptorium's resources, the period, and the quality desired. But today, this piece needs your attention. You might notice imperfections, a small scar from an insect bite on the living animal, now a tiny hole or a translucent blemish, or perhaps a place where the scraping was a little too enthusiastic, leaving a thin spot that will require careful handling. This parchment has character, you might muse, which is a polite way of saying it's going to be a bit challenging. A tiny hole is the medieval equivalent of a paper jam, only far less fixable and much more expensive to replace. First, you secure the parchment to your desk. Some scribes might use small lead weights on the corners, or simply the pressure of their non-writing hand. You take your pumice stone, a light, porous volcanic rock, and begin to gently rub it across the surface. This isn't a vigorous scrubbing, it's a delicate, patient abrasion. The pumice smooths away any lingering greasy residues. Even the natural oils from your own hands can interfere with how the ink adheres, and creates a very fine, almost imperceptible nap on the surface, a microscopic tooth that will grip the ink and prevent it from spreading or beading. A fine, pale dust rises as you work, and you carefully brush it away with a cloth or the side of your hand. It's like an extremely dedicated, albeit slightly morbid, skincare routine, preparing this ancient canvas. Next, you might reach for your lunellum. This is a small, crescent-shaped knife, a rather quirky and specialized tool of the trade, designed specifically for scraping parchment. Some scribes might just use the back of their versatile penknife for this. You hold the blade almost perpendicular to the surface and, with light, controlled strokes, you shave away any remaining roughness, tiny bumps, or stubborn follicle bases. If you're working on a palimpsest, a recycled piece of parchment from which previous writing has been scraped or washed off, this step would be even more critical, though preparing a full palimpsest is a much more involved process of washing and extensive scraping, often leaving faint ghosts of the earlier text. Today, thankfully, your sheet is fresh, or at least, intended for new work. As you work, you become intimately familiar with this particular piece of skin. You learn its landscape, its subtle variations in thickness and texture. You are, in a very real sense, taming it, coaxing it into a state of readiness for the sacred or scholarly words it is destined to bear. It's a slow, methodical process. There's no rushing this. A poorly prepared surface can ruin hours of careful writing. The ink might feather, bleed through, or simply refuse to flow smoothly from the quill. So, you work with a focused patience, your movements economical and precise. The only sounds are the faint rasp of the pumice, the whisper soft scrape of the blade, and your own steady breathing in the quiet room. Once you're satisfied with the smoothness, you might apply pounce. Pounce is a fine powder, often made from finely ground cuttlefish bone, which is mostly calcium carbonate, chalk, or sometimes powdered gum sandarach, a type of resin. You sprinkle a small amount onto the parchment and then gently rub it across the surface with a soft cloth or even the palm of your hand, ensuring it's worked into the very fabric of the skin. This helps to further degrease the surface and provides an even finer key for the ink, promoting sharp, crisp lines. The exact recipe and application method for pounce, and indeed how universally it was employed by scribes across different regions and historical periods, is often a subject of speculation and ongoing research among cardicologists, those who study the book as a physical object. Some surviving instruction manuals for scribes mention it explicitly, while others don't, leading to these discussions. After pouncing, you carefully brush away any excess powder. The parchment now has a uniquely receptive feel to it, smooth, yet not slippery, with a subtle velvety texture. You hold it up, angling it towards the weak light filtering through the high windows, inspecting your work. Are there any shiny spots that indicate lingering grease? Any rough patches you missed? Your fingertips, sensitive from years of this work, can detect imperfections your eyes might overlook in the dim light. A quirky, lesser-known fact is that experienced scribes could develop an almost tactile sixth sense for the quality and readiness of their parchment, identifying the animal it came from or even the region it was processed in, simply by its feel and response to their tools. The preparation of this single leaf, or bifolium, might take a considerable amount of time. It's a quiet, meditative part of your day, a prelude to the more intellectually demanding task of transcription. There's a certain satisfaction in it, the transformation of a raw, somewhat recalcitrant material into a pristine surface, eager for the imprint of words. It's a tiny, personal victory in the face of the day's larger challenges. The cold still gnaws at your fingers, your back is already beginning to anticipate the ache of long hours hunched over, but in this perfectly prepared sheet of parchment, there is a sense of order, of potential. It's a blank promise, waiting to be filled. You lay it carefully back on your desk, ensuring it's perfectly flat and secure. The skin is now, finally, a page. Your parchment lies pristine and ready, a pale, smooth field awaiting cultivation. But a field, however well prepared, is useless without seed. And for you, the scribe, that seed is ink. Not just any ink, but a concoction that must be consistent, flow smoothly from your quill, and bind permanently to the skin, creating marks that will hopefully endure for centuries. This is where the sooty alchemy, or perhaps more accurately, the Gallic alchemy, truly begins. You turn your attention to your inkpot, a humble vessel of horn, ceramic, or perhaps even lead-glazed earthenware. It sits patiently on your desk, a small, dark well of potential. Most scribes, especially in established scriptoria, wouldn't be grinding up raw ingredients every single morning. Ink making, particularly the creation of iron gall ink, was often done in larger batches. However, the daily tending and preparation of one's personal ink supply was a crucial ritual. The most common ink used for manuscript writing in the medieval West, a historical fact well established by researchers, was iron gall ink. Carbon black ink, made from soot, lampblack, mixed with a binder like gum, was older and excellent for its deep blackness and permanence, especially favored in some earlier periods and in other cultures, but iron gall ink had largely taken over for parchment work in Europe by your time. It had the advantage of chemically bonding with the parchment, making it very durable, and it flowed nicely from a quill. Its one little quirk? It often started out a pale grey or brownish color when first applied, only darkening to a rich black or deep brown-black upon oxidation, as it reacted with the air. A bit like a moody teenager, it only revealed its true colors after a little time and exposure. Let's imagine you're checking on a batch you, or a fellow specialist in the scriptorium, prepared a few days or weeks ago. You lift the small lid or remove the plug from your inkpot. The aroma that greets you is distinctive, a slightly metallic, acidic, and perhaps faintly sweet or wine-like scent. This is the signature perfume of your craft, a far cry from the flowery concoctions modern folk might dab on their wrists. Yours is the scent of knowledge in the making. The primary ingredients for this remarkable fluid are surprisingly common, yet their combination is almost magical. First, there are oak galls, those strange, round growths found on oak trees, caused by the larvae of gall wasps. These galls are rich in tannic and gallic acids. Then there's vitriol, which in this context usually means iron, 2-sulfate, often called green vitriol or copperas, a bit of a misnomer, as it's iron-based, not copper. This provides the iron component. And finally, a binder is needed, most commonly gum arabic, a resin harvested from acacia trees, which helps the ink flow, binds the pigment particles together, and adheres them to the writing surface. All of this is mixed with a liquid. Water is common, but as a quirky historical tidbit, some recipes called for wine, beer, or even, in certain less formal or more experimental recipes, urine. The wine or beer might have been thought to prevent the ink from freezing in those unheated scriptoria, or perhaps to lend certain qualities to its flow or color. The precise rationale for some of these additives is sometimes lost to us, though the ammonia in urine could have acted as a degreaser or affected the pH. You probably stick to water or wine in your scriptorium, an institution of dignity, after all. If you were making it from scratch, you'd have crushed the dried oak galls in a mortar, a noisy, dusty job. Then, these crushed galls would be soaked or even boiled in water or wine for several days to extract the precious acids. The resulting liquid, a sort of gallnut tea, would then be filtered. Separately, the iron sulfate crystals would be dissolved in liquid. Then, the two solutions would be combined. This is where the initial magic happens. Though it's a slow transformation, the mixture wouldn't turn black instantly. It's a chemical dance that takes time. Finally, the powdered gum arabic would be stirred in, dissolving to create the right viscosity, not too thick to clog the quill, not too thin to bleed into the parchment fibers. The precise ratios of these ingredients are often a point of scholarly contention. Surviving medieval recipes can be wonderfully vague, using measurements like a handful of galls or as much vitriol as a walnut. This leads to ongoing experimentation by modern researchers and historical craftspeople trying to replicate these ancient inks faithfully. Some historical recipes are so imprecise they read less like chemistry and more like a particularly optimistic session in a potions class. Today, however, your main concern is the condition of your existing supply. You dip a spare, clean quill or a small wooden stirrer into the pot. Is the ink too thick? It can happen overnight as water evaporates, especially in the dry air. If so, you'll need to add a tiny drop or two of water or wine, stirring it in patiently until the consistency is just right. Too thin? That's trickier, as it might mean the batch wasn't made with enough gum arabic, or it has separated. You might try adding a minuscule amount of freshly powdered gum, but that risks clumps. Usually, an ink that's too thin is a sign of a problematic batch. You also look for signs of trouble. Mold can grow on ink, especially if it has a high organic content and isn't acidic enough. You'd see a fuzzy layer on top, and that's a bad sign, potentially affecting the ink's quality and longevity. Sediment can also be an issue, where the pigment particles settle at the bottom, leaving a watery liquid on top. Thorough stirring is essential. This daily checkup is vital. Your ink is your partner in this work, and like any good partner, it needs understanding and care. Whether scribes in all settings meticulously made their own ink from base components, or if, particularly in larger urban centers or wealthier institutions, they could purchase ready-made ink cakes or even liquid ink, likely depended greatly on local resources, the scale of production, and individual preference. Once you're satisfied with the consistency, you'll want to test it. You reach for a scheduler, a scrap piece of parchment kept for just such purposes, for testing nibs and, of course, ink. You dip a working quill, one you'll likely use today, into the pot, ensuring just the right amount of ink is drawn up into the nib slit. Then, on the scrap, you make a few practice strokes, a straight line, a curve, perhaps a letter or two. You watch how it flows. Does it glide smoothly, or does it catch and stutter? Is the color even? Does it feather out into the parchment fibers, indicating the ink is too thin or the parchment still greasy, despite your best efforts from section 4? Does it dry too quickly, or remain stubbornly wet? Iron gall ink has another characteristic that scribes had to be aware of, its acidity. Over centuries, this acidity could actually burn through the parchment, leaving a lace-like pattern where the letters once were, or making the text appear on the reverse side of the leaf. This is a phenomenon restorers and librarians are all too familiar with when handling ancient manuscripts. So, while it was a wonderfully permanent ink in many ways, it had its own built-in self-destruct mechanism, albeit one that operated on a timescale of centuries. You, of course, aren't thinking that far ahead. Your concern is getting through today's quota with crisp, clear, and enduring black marks. The alchemy of ink is a delicate balance. Too much gallic acid, and it might be too corrosive. Too much vitriol, and it might crystallize or fade unpredictably. Too little gum arabic, and it won't adhere properly. It's a craft learned through experience, through trial and error, through shared knowledge passed down from master to apprentice. You might even have a small, personal notebook where you jot down observations about different batches, different ingredients, or the effects of weather on your ink's behavior. Or you just commit it all to memory, your brain a living database of scribal quirks and solutions. The scriptorium is quiet, but your mind is active, assessing, adjusting, preparing. The rich, dark fluid in your pot is more than just colored water, it's history waiting to happen, one meticulously penned letter at a time. And you, the humble scribe, are its conduit. With your parchment smoothed to perfection and your ink stirred to just the right consistency, your gaze now falls upon the next crucial instrument in your daily symphony of script, the humble feather. You have a small bundle of them, perhaps tied together with a bit of twine, resting in a designated spot on your desk or in a nearby niche. These aren't just any feathers plucked randomly from a passing bird. These are typically the primary flight feathers of a goose, or sometimes a swan for larger, more robust quills, or even a crow for finer work. Each one is a marvel of natural engineering, light yet strong, and destined for a purpose far removed from soaring through the sky. You select one. Experienced scribes often develop distinct preferences. A quirky, yet practical, tidbit that many historical sources confirm is the preference among right-hand scribes for feathers taken from the left wing of the bird. The natural curve of these feathers arcs away from the line of sight and fits more comfortably into the right hand, allowing for a better view of the nib as it meets the parchment. For left-handed scribes, the reverse was true, right-wing feathers were preferred. It's a small detail, but in a job that involves hours of repetitive motion, such ergonomic considerations, even if instinctively adopted, could make a significant difference. The feather you choose feels light in your hand. You examine its barrel, the calamus, the hollow, translucent tube at the base. It needs to be strong, with a good spring to it. Some feathers might have already undergone a process called dutching or tempering. This involved briefly heating the barrel in hot sand or ash, or by other methods of controlled heat application, which hardened the keratin, making it less likely to split during cutting and helping it hold a sharp point for longer. Whether every scribe meticulously dutched their own feathers, or if some were supplied already treated, especially in larger scriptoria, is not always definitively clear from the historical records. Let's assume this one has been suitably prepared, or that you're skilled enough to work with it as is. Now comes the star of this particular operation, your penknife. This small, exceedingly sharp blade is perhaps your most versatile and indispensable tool. You use it for scraping parchment, for making corrections, and, most importantly, for shaping and reshaping the delicate point of your quill. Its edge is kept razor-sharp, a testament to your care and reliance on it. Trying to cut a quill with a dull knife is like trying to perform surgery with a butter spreader, messy, frustrating, and unlikely to yield good results. The process of cutting a quill nib is an art form in itself, a skill honed over countless hours of practice. It's not something you master overnight. The mainstream historical understanding of quill cutting involves several key steps, each requiring precision and a steady hand. First, you make an initial oblique cut across the end of the barrel, removing the very tip and exposing the hollow interior. Then, you carefully pare away some of the underside of this cut, creating a sort of scoop or channel. The next step is absolutely crucial, slitting the nib. You place the tip of the feather on a hard, smooth surface, perhaps a spare piece of horn or a very smooth stone, and, with your penknife, make a short, fine slit upwards from the center of the cut tip, directly into the barrel. This slit, usually only a few millimeters long, is what allows the ink to be drawn up into the nib through capillary action and then flow down to the writing surface in a controlled manner. If this slit is too long, too short, off-center, or too wide, the quill simply won't write properly. It might release a blob of ink, or none at all. It's a moment of bated breath, this tiny incision. Once the slit is successfully made, you begin to shape the shoulders of the nib. With delicate strokes of your knife, you trim away material from either side of the slit, tapering the point to the desired width and angle. The width of this tip will directly influence the thickness of your strokes and the overall appearance of your script. A broader nib is used for scripts with strong thick and thin contrasts, like some forms of Gothic textura, while a finer point might be used for cursive hands or smaller annotations. The exact angle and complexity of this nib cut for specific scripts, and how these features evolved across different regions and time periods, is something that paleographers, scholars who study ancient and historical handwriting, still meticulously analyze and discuss by examining the subtle variations in letterforms found in surviving manuscripts. You might have several quills, each cut for a different purpose, or you might be skilled at reshaping a single quill for various needs. This feather you're working on now is intended for the main text block, so you aim for a standard, reliable width. Finally, you make the very last cut, trimming the end of the nib itself. This cut is usually made straight across, or sometimes at a slight oblique angle, depending on the script and your personal preference. This tiny flat surface at the very tip is what will actually make contact with the parchment. It needs to be perfectly smooth and precisely angled. You might hold it up to the faint light, squinting to ensure its symmetry and sharpness. The whole process is a delicate dance between your fingers, the feather, and the keen edge of your knife. A single miscalculation, a twitch of the hand, and you could ruin the point, forcing you to cut it back further and start that part of the shaping again, or even abandon the feather if it becomes too short. A freshly cut quill point is a beautiful thing, but it's also tragically ephemeral. The keratin of the feather, even if dutched, wears down relatively quickly against the slightly abrasive surface of the parchment. You'll need to resharpen this point, or renib it, many times throughout the day. Some sources suggest a good quill might only last for a page or two of dense script before needing attention. So, this ritual of cutting and shaping is not a one-time morning task, it's an ongoing dialogue with your tool. This quill is more high maintenance than a demanding opera singer, constantly needing pampering and precise adjustments. Now, the moment of truth. You dip your newly fashioned nib into your ink pot, the one you so carefully checked earlier. You watch as the ink creeps up the tiny slit, a dark line against the pale feather. Then, you turn to your scheduler, that ever-present scrap of parchment, your testing ground. You make a few tentative strokes. A downstroke, an upstroke, a lateral. How does it feel? Does the ink flow evenly? Is the line crisp and sharp, or does it feel scratchy? Are the thicks and thins appearing as they should? You are listening with your fingertips, feeling the subtle feedback from the quill as it moves across the surface. Perhaps the line is a little too broad. You pick up your penknife again and, with an almost imperceptible shaving, narrow the tip ever so slightly. Too scratchy? Maybe the slit needs a tiny extension, or the very tip needs a smoother finish. You make these micro-adjustments with the patience of a saint, because you know that a well-behaved quill is half the battle. If your quill isn't right, even the most beautiful exemplar and the finest ink won't save your script from looking like, well, like a chicken has had a rather dramatic and messy argument with the page. After a few more test strokes and adjustments, you achieve it, the perfect point. The ink flows like silk, the lines are clean, the feel is just right. A small sigh of satisfaction might escape you. It's a minor victory, but an essential one. This carefully crafted point, born from a simple bird's feather and your own skilled hands, is now ready to dance across the prepared skin, to give voice to silent words, to transform blankness into meaning. You lay the quill down gently, ready for the next stage, the ruling of the lines that will guide your hand. The air in the scriptorium remains still and cold, but there's a quiet hum of readiness building within you. The stage is meticulously set. Your parchment, a smooth, receptive skin, lies waiting. Your ink, a dark, viscous promise, sits patiently in its pot. Your quill, freshly cut to a perfect point, rests by your fingers, a conduit for the words to come. But before that first drop of ink kisses the page, before the dance of letters begins, there must be order. An unruled page, to a scribe, is like a field without furrows, beautiful in its potential, perhaps, but impossible to cultivate with any precision. You need lines, guides for your hand, a framework to contain the tide of script. You need the parchment's corset, as it were, to ensure everything stays neatly aligned and elegantly proportioned. First, if it hasn't been done already for a whole choir, comes the pricking. You take a sharp awl, or perhaps the very tip of your trusty penknife, and a ruler. Along the outer vertical margins of the parchment sheet, or stack of sheets if preparing several at once, you make a series of tiny, almost invisible pricks or holes. These are spaced with painstaking accuracy, guided by measurements that might be memorized, marked on your ruler, or even taken from a template. These pricks will serve as the starting and ending points for your ruled lines, ensuring they are parallel and evenly spaced across the page and, crucially, consistent from one page to the next within a choir. It's a task requiring precision. A slip here can throw off the entire layout of your page, leading to a skewed or cramped text block. Once the pricks are in place, you're ready to rule. The most common methods for ruling, a well-established historical fact, involved either a lead point, called a plummet, or a dry point stylus. The lead point, essentially a small piece of lead alloy, leaves a faint, erasable grey line, much like a modern pencil, though far softer and more subtle. The dry point stylus, on the other hand, is typically made of bone, metal, or even agate. It doesn't leave a mark of color but instead creates a shallow furrow or indentation in the parchment. This furrow guides the quill, and the lines are often only visible when the page is held at an angle to the light. The choice between lead and dry point might depend on tradition, personal preference, or the desired aesthetic of the finished manuscript, as lead lines, if not erased, would remain faintly visible, while dry point lines were more ghostly. You pick up your ruler, a straight-edged piece of wood, bone, or perhaps even metal if your scriptorium is well equipped, and align it with a pair of pricks on opposite margins. Then, with your chosen ruling tool, you draw the line. If using a lead point, the motion is gentle, a soft whisper across the skin, leaving behind that pale grey guide. If using a dry point, you apply a bit more pressure, impressing the line into the parchment surface. The The sound is a faint, smooth hiss or a barely audible scratching, depending on the tool and the parchment. You repeat this process for every horizontal line that will carry your text, and often for vertical bounding lines as well, which define the left and right margins of your text column or columns. The number of lines, their spacing, the distance between baselines, and the overall dimensions of the text block are all carefully predetermined by the nature of the text being copied and the desired layout of the book. Some manuscripts, particularly those intended for scholarly use with extensive glosses, commentaries written in the margins or between the lines of the main text, or those designed to incorporate illustrations or decorative initials, had incredibly intricate ruling patterns. A quirky, lesser-known aspect of manuscript studies is the analysis of these complex layouts, which were almost architectural in their planning, with different zones of the page ruled for different types of content, all mapped out before a single word of the main text was inscribed. The faint traces of these ruling lines, whether of lead or impressed by a stylus, are often still visible in medieval manuscripts today, providing invaluable clues to paleographers and cardicologists about the production process and the scribe's working methods. Whether the ink used for ruling, when actual ink was employed, more common for decorative lines or complex diagrams than for the main text block, was sometimes a deliberately diluted version of the main writing ink, or perhaps a specially prepared lighter ink formula, is a matter of ongoing discussion and analysis among manuscript scholars. The process of ruling is meditative, repetitive, yet demanding of unwavering concentration. Your eyes follow the ruler's edge, your hand maintains steady pressure. A crooked line is a glaring flaw, an unwelcome ripple in the sea of text. Finally, after what might feel like a significant passage of time, but is merely a fraction of your day's labor, the page is fully ruled. It now bears a grid of faint lines, a subtle but essential scaffold upon which your words will be built. It's a thing of quiet beauty in its own right, this network of potential. You take a moment. You look at the exemplar, the master copy you are to reproduce, positioned conveniently nearby, perhaps on a small lectern or propped against a weight. You read a few words, refamiliarizing yourself with the script, the flow, the specific letter forms. You clear your mind of distractions. The gentle, almost inaudible hum of the scriptorium is the only sound, apart from your own breathing. Now, for the first true commitment of ink to this carefully prepared page. You pick up your perfectly sharpened quill, the one you so painstakingly crafted earlier. With a steady hand, you dip its very tip into your inkpot. Not too deep, you don't want a blob of ink that will drip and spoil your pristine surface. Just enough for the ink to be drawn up into that tiny, crucial slit in the nib. You might lightly touch the nib against the inner rim of the inkpot to shed any excess, a gesture as practiced and unconscious as blinking. This moment, this first dip, can feel almost like the start of a performance, or perhaps the trepidation before a first date. You hope it goes smoothly, that the connection is good. You position your hand, your quill held at the correct angle for the script you are about to write. You take a breath. And then, you touch the quill to the parchment. The first stroke. It's a moment of pure focus. The ink, perhaps still a pale greyish hue if it's fresh iron gall, flows from the nib onto the skin. The sensation is unique, the slight drag of the quill, the almost imperceptible give of the parchment beneath it. You begin to form the letters, carefully, meticulously copying from the exemplar. The shapes emerge, line by line, curve by curve. The first word takes shape. Then the next. The sound is incredibly soft, a tiny, dry scratching, the voice of the quill speaking its inky language. It's a sound that will be your constant companion for the many hours to come, a sound that, for a scribe, is perhaps more familiar than any other. You watch as the fresh ink begins its slow transformation, gradually darkening on the page, sinking into the fibers of the animal skin, becoming a permanent part of it. The first few lines are often the slowest, as you settle into the rhythm, finding your pace, ensuring your letter height, spacing, and inclination match the exemplar and the ruled lines. There's no delete key here, no undo button. Every mark is a commitment. The journey of 1,000 words, or in your case, many thousands of characters, begins with this single, carefully placed stroke. The silence of the scriptorium is now punctuated by the faintest whisper of your labor, a sound that is, in its own way, the sound of civilization being built, one letter at a time. The first hour or two of work have passed in a state of deep absorption. Line by line, your quill has danced across the parchment, leaving its trail of darkening ink. The scriptorium, once filled with the rustle of arrivals and the quiet preparation of tools, has settled into a profound, almost tangible silence, broken only by the collective, near-inaudible whisper of quills and the occasional soft sigh or muffled cough. The faint light from the high windows has slowly strengthened as true dawn has broken outside, but even at its best, the illumination within these stone walls is often muted, indirect, and far from what your modern descendants would consider adequate for such detailed work. Your world is a small circle of focus, the exemplar, your hand, the growing patch of text on the page. But now, as the morning wears on, other sensations begin to intrude upon your concentration, subtle at first, then more insistent. The chill, that constant companion since you first stirred from your pallet, seems to be renewing its efforts. Your fingers, despite their constant movement, feel stiff and cold, the blood not circulating as freely as it should. You might find yourself flexing them more often, blowing warm breath into your cupped hands when you pause to re-ink your quill. Your toes, encased in their leather shoes and woolen hose, are distant, numb outposts. Then there's your posture. You're hunched over your sloping desk, a position necessary to maintain control over the quill and to see your work clearly. The hard wooden bench you sit on offers no concession to the shape of your body, no lumbar support, no ergonomic design. Those are concepts for a far distant future. A dull ache begins to bloom in your lower back, a familiar protest. Your shoulders are rounded, your neck craned forward. You try to straighten up, to roll your shoulders back, but the need to focus on the tiny, precise movements of your hand inevitably pulls you back into that familiar, strained curve. Your body is starting to send you little complaint notes, which will soon escalate to strongly worded letters if past experience is anything to go by. And your eyes. Your poor eyes. They are engaged in what can only be described as a medieval form of micro-crossfit, constantly shifting focus between the exemplar, the tip of your quill, and the lines you've just written, all in less than ideal lighting. The flickering of any nearby candlelight, if still in use, or the uneven natural light, contributes to a growing sense of fatigue. You might find yourself blinking more frequently, or rubbing your eyes with the back of your hand, very carefully, of course, to avoid transferring any ink smudges from your fingers to your face, or worse, to the precious parchment. A gritty, tired sensation begins to settle in, a precursor to the headaches that sometimes plague you by day's end. It's a well-documented historical reality that scribes frequently suffered from severe eye strain due to these demanding conditions, a professional hazard of their meticulous craft. The hand gripping the quill, your primary instrument, starts to voice its own grievances. The constant, controlled pressure, the repetitive fine motor movements, lead to a cramping sensation in your fingers and wrist. You might try to adjust your grip slightly, to hold the quill a little looser, but this can compromise the precision of your script. So, you endure, perhaps pausing for a brief moment to shake out your hand, to wiggle your fingers, before returning to the task. These are the small, almost unconscious rituals of discomfort management that punctuate your day. The physical toll of this work is undeniable. While the image of a scribe is often one of quiet contemplation, the reality involves significant bodily strain. This is sometimes vividly captured in the marginalia of manuscripts themselves. As a quirky, almost poignant historical insight, scribes would occasionally use the edges of their pages to jot down personal complaints or observations. You might find little notes in Latin or vernacular like, "My hand is tired, the ink is bad and the parchment is greasy and my back aches," or even more expressive lament about the cold or the sheer tedium of copying a lengthy, uninteresting text. These small, humanizing notes offer a direct window into their daily struggles, a reminder that these beautiful books were created by real people experiencing very real discomforts. One famous example even ends with the plea, explicit hoc totum, pro Christo die mihi potum. The whole thing is finished, for Christ's sake, give me a drink. You can almost hear the sigh of relief and exhaustion in those words. You take a slow, deep breath, trying to maintain that zen-like focus the work demands, even as your body sends increasingly loud signals of distress. The extent to which scribes were permitted or encouraged to take regular, short breaks to alleviate physical strain, or perhaps even to vary their posture by standing at a taller lectern for a time, is difficult to ascertain definitively from many prescriptive monastic rules, which often emphasized silence and continuous, diligent labor without necessarily detailing these practical concessions for well-being. The emphasis was on the spiritual discipline of the work, the act of copying seen as a form of prayer or meritorious labor. Whether any commonly accepted scribe stretches or specific physical exercises were known or practiced to counteract the effects of their intensely sedentary work is a fascinating but largely speculative area, with little direct evidence surviving in the historical record. Perhaps you have your own discreet ways of easing the tension, a subtle stretch of the neck, a quick clenching and unclenching of the fists, a momentary straightening of the spine when the armarius isn't looking too closely. The cold continues its insidious work, not just making you uncomfortable but also subtly impairing your dexterity. Stiff fingers are less nimble, less able to execute the fine, controlled movements required for beautiful script. You might find your lines becoming slightly less certain, your curves a little less smooth, and have to consciously refocus, to exert even more control. There's no thermostat to adjust, no cozy blanket to drape over your lap beyond your standard woolen garments. You simply endure the chiller dull, constant background hum to the more acute aches and pains. It becomes a mental game. Acknowledging the discomfort is inevitable, but dwelling on it is counterproductive. You try to channel your focus back to the text, to the rhythm of the words, the shapes of the letters. Each correctly formed letter, each clean line, is a small victory against the encroaching weariness. You are not just copying words, you are, in a way, transcending the limitations of your own tired body, pouring your energy and concentration onto the page. But it's a battle, a quiet, internal struggle waged every day in scriptoria across the medieval world. The ideal is serene, focused devotion to the task. The reality is often a symphony of minor aches, a persistent chill, and the ever-present strain on the eyes, all born with a stoicism born of necessity and dedication. The quiet sighs you hear around you are not just of boredom, but of bodies protesting their prolonged, static ordeal. The sun, your only true timepiece in this hushed world, has climbed higher in the sky, its light, though still filtered and indirect, now falling with a little more conviction through the tall scriptorium windows. Hours have passed since you first touched quill to parchment, hours filled with the rhythmic scratching of your pen, the intense focus of your eyes, and the growing chorus of your body's complaints. A new sensation now makes itself known, a dull, hollow ache in your stomach, a gentle but persistent reminder that the human machine, however dedicated to its task, requires fuel. There might not be a loud bell signaling a designated lunch break, not in the way your descendants might imagine. Monastic life had its set times for communal meals in the refectory, but this midday point, often around sext, the 6th hour after sunrise, might allow for a brief, almost furtive pause for those engaged in demanding labor like yours. Or perhaps it's simply your own internal clock, your body's wisdom asserting itself over the demands of the text. The exact timing and nature of this midday pause, whether it was a recognized nuncheon or simply an individual, almost stealthy, snack, is subject to some interpretation from historical sources, which often focus more on the main, formal meals. You decide it's time. To continue much longer without sustenance would be to invite clumsiness, a trembling hand, or a lapse in concentration, any of which could lead to a disastrous error on the precious parchment. With a slow exhalation, you carefully lift your quill from the page, perhaps marking your exact stopping point in the exemplar with a small, dry slip of vellum or a weighted thread. You cap your ink pot securely to prevent accidental spills or the ink from drying out too much. Your meal is, by any modern standard, incredibly modest. You reach for the small bundle you brought with you this morning, wrapped in a piece of linen cloth. There's no elaborate packed lunch here, no Tupperware containers filled with culinary delights. This is sustenance, pure and simple. The cornerstone of your meal, a historical fact true for most medieval people, is bread. Not a fluffy, white loaf, but a dense, rather coarse hunk of dark bread, likely made from rye or barley, perhaps with some wheat if you're fortunate. It's filling, sustaining, the very staff of life. Alongside it, you might have a small wedge of hard cheese, pungent and salty. It's the kind of cheese that travels well and doesn't require refrigeration, which is handy, as refrigeration is still several centuries away from being a household concept. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a power bar, only with more character. If the season is right, you might have an apple or a pear, a welcome burst of sweetness and moisture. Or perhaps a few dried figs or dates, if the scriptorium or your household has access to such imported luxuries. There's unlikely to be any meat unless it's a very special occasion or you're a lay scribe with different dietary norms. Monastic rules often restricted meat consumption. Perhaps you have a small wooden or pottery bowl containing some leftover pottage from the previous evening, a thick, savory stew of vegetables, grains, and herbs, now cold and congealed, but still nutritious. You eat it with your fingers or perhaps scoop it up with a piece of your bread. As for a drink, water is a possibility, but it was often viewed with suspicion in medieval times due to concerns about its purity. More likely, you have a small flask of weak ale, small beer, or very diluted wine. These beverages were generally safer, the fermentation process having killed off many harmful bacteria. Where do you consume this meager midday morsel? Whether scribes, particularly those in monastic settings with strict rules about eating only in the refectory, were commonly permitted to consume even this small snack at their actual writing desks, or if they were required to step away, however briefly, is a detail that likely varied between institutions. Let's imagine you remain at your desk, for the sake of efficiency and to avoid drawing undue attention to your break. You spread your linen cloth carefully to catch any crumbs. The thought of a greasy crumb or a sticky residue on your precious parchment is enough to give any scribe nightmares. You eat slowly, deliberately, though the entire pause will be brief. This isn't a leisurely affair, it's a pit stop. The scriptorium remains quiet. Other scribes might also be taking a similar pause, each lost in their own small world of bread and cheese. There are no shared tables, no cafeteria chatter. If there's any interaction, it's a silent nod, a shared glance of understanding. For the most part, you eat in solitude, your eyes perhaps unfocusing slightly, gazing at a distant point on the wall, or at a dust mote dancing in a shaft of weak sunlight that has managed to penetrate the gloom. This, right here, is your midday entertainment, the thrilling aerial ballet of a single speck of dust. It's a long way from scrolling through a news feed. The food itself is simple, but to your hungry body, it's welcome. The rough bread requires effort to chew. The cheese is sharp on your tongue. You might take a moment to gently stretch your aching back, to rotate your stiff neck, to flex your cramped fingers, now free from the grip of the quill. The cold is still present, of course, perhaps making the food seem even less appealing, but the act of eating itself generates a tiny spark of internal warmth. A quirky historical tidbit: in some monastic orders, particularly during periods of intensive work like harvesting or, indeed, long hours in the scriptorium, a practice known as a bever, derived from the Old French word bevre, meaning to drink, was sometimes permitted. This was a short, informal break for a drink and perhaps a small piece of bread, distinct from the main meals. It was a small concession to human need, a brief moment of refreshment. Your current pause feels much like this, a functional necessity rather than a true respite. Too soon, the small meal is finished. You carefully gather any crumbs from your cloth, perhaps brushing them onto the floor, where they'll eventually be swept away, or find their way to an enterprising mouse. You wipe your hands thoroughly on the cloth, ensuring no grease or stickiness remains. The thought of returning to your work with even slightly soiled fingers is unthinkable. You take a final sip of your drink. The brief interlude is over. The gnawing in your stomach has subsided, replaced by a slightly less distracting sense of modest repletion. Now, the mental shift back to work must occur. You look again at your exemplar, at the ruled lines on your current sheet of parchment, at the point where your last stroke ended. The world of words, of meticulous copying, reasserts its claim. The aches and chills, momentarily ignored, begin to make their presence known again, a gentle reminder that the afternoon's labor still lies ahead. With a quiet sigh, born more of resignation than complaint, you uncap your ink, pick up your quill, and prepare to re-enter the flow of focused creation. The meager morsel has done its job. It has provided just enough energy, just enough of a pause, to allow you to continue your vital, if unseen, contribution to the vast river of knowledge. The brief respite of your meager midday morsel is now a fading memory, a small, solitary island in the vast ocean of the afternoon's labor. You've re-immersed yourself in the exemplar, your quill once again tracing its path across the ruled lines of your parchment. The initial effort to regain the deep focus you had before your break was tangible, like coaxing a sleepy animal back to its task. But now, you are back in the rhythm, the familiar scratch of quill on skin, the dominant sound in your personal world. The afternoon stretches before you, a seemingly endless expanse of text. The sun, your silent collaborator and clock, continues its slow arc across the heavens. Its light, filtering through the high scriptorium windows, shifts gradually, changing the angle of shadows, altering the way the ink looks on the page, sometimes offering a brief moment of clearer illumination, other times seeming to fade prematurely as clouds drift by outside. You are acutely aware of this slow passage of light, as it dictates the practical limits of your working day. This is the long haul, the heart of the textual sea. Line after line, word after word, letter after letter. The work is intensely repetitive. You read a short phrase from the exemplar, commit it to your short-term memory, then transfer it through your hand and quill to your own page, striving for an exact reproduction of each character's form, size, and spacing. Then your eyes flick back to the exemplar, find the next phrase, and the process repeats. And repeats. And repeats. It's a meticulous, focused monotony, a kind of active meditation, though your aching back might argue it's less meditation and more a slow form of physical penance. The sheer volume of copying undertaken in scriptoria like this across the medieval world was immense, forming the bedrock of preserved knowledge. Scribes were the human conduits for religious texts like Bibles, psalters, and complex theological arguments. They painstakingly duplicated classical literature from ancient Greece and Rome, the works of Virgil, Cicero, Aristotle. They transcribed essential legal codes, medical treatises, and early scientific observations, ensuring these intellectual treasures weren't lost to the ravages of time. What you are copying today, be it a passage of scripture, a philosophical argument, or a chronicle of past events, is part of this grand, slow-moving river of information. Maintaining consistency is one of the afternoon's greatest challenges. As fatigue begins to seep more deeply into your bones and your mind, the precision of your script can waver. Letters might lean a little more, or shrink or expand slightly. The spacing between words can become irregular. You must constantly refer back not only to the exemplar but also to the lines you yourself wrote earlier in the day, striving to keep your hand uniform. A page of well-executed script should have a serene, almost woven texture, and any significant variation is a visual disruption, a mark of flagging attention. It's like trying to herd particularly wayward sheep with your brain and your quill. Each letter has the potential to wander off if you're not vigilant. The average daily output of a medieval scribe is a matter of considerable debate among historians and paleographers. It varied widely based on so many factors. The complexity of the script, a formal textura quadrata is far slower to write than a more cursive bookhand, the number of abbreviations used, which saved time but required accurate expansion by the reader, whether the scribe was also responsible for any rubrication, adding red titles or initials, or leaving space for illuminations, the quality and legibility of the exemplar, the conditions of the scriptorium, and of course, the individual skill, experience, and stamina of the scribe. Estimates can range from just 1 or 2 folios, a single leaf, front and back, to perhaps as many as 4 or 5 for straightforward, unadorned text in a practiced hand. How scribes paced themselves, or if they had strictly enforced daily quotas in different types of scriptoria, such as a bustling university-affiliated workshop versus a contemplative monastic setting, is not consistently documented and likely varied enormously. You simply work as diligently as you can for as long as the light and your own endurance permit. Later in the afternoon, as the sun begins its descent, the quality of light in the scriptorium noticeably deteriorates. The shadows lengthen, and the corners of the room retreat into deeper gloom. This is when eye strain becomes particularly acute. You might find yourself leaning closer to the parchment, squinting more, your eyes feeling dry and gritty. The precious daylight is ebbing, and with it, the ease of your task. A quirky system that developed, particularly in university towns from the 13th century onwards to cope with the increasing demand for texts, was the Pecha system. Official, verified exemplars of key university texts were divided into unbound sections, or Pecha, which were kept by licensed stationers. Students or professional scribes could then rent these pieces one or two at a time for copying. This allowed multiple scribes to work on different parts of the same book simultaneously, significantly speeding up production and helping to ensure greater accuracy as each piece was theoretically checked against the original. It was an ingenious solution to a bottleneck in the dissemination of knowledge, a kind of medieval distributed processing system for book production. You, however, are likely working from a bound exemplar, or at least a complete section, focusing on your single, painstaking contribution. The physical discomforts you felt earlier, the ache in your back, the stiffness in your neck, the cramp in your writing hand, have now become persistent companions. They are no longer easily ignored. You might find yourself shifting your position on the hard bench more frequently, trying to find a new angle that offers even a moment's relief. Perhaps you pause more often to re-ink your quill, not just because it needs ink, but because it allows your hand a micro-break, a chance to flex your fingers. The quill itself wears down faster as your hand becomes heavier with fatigue, requiring more frequent resharpening with your penknife. Each of these small interruptions, while necessary, breaks the flow and makes it harder to maintain your pace and consistency. By this point in the afternoon, even your most elegantly formed letters might begin to look as though they, too, have had a very long and trying day and could do with a stiff drink of diluted wine. Mental fatigue is also setting in. Your mind, once sharply focused, may begin to wander. Stray thoughts drift in and out. The repetitive nature of the task, which can be meditative in shorter bursts, becomes a significant challenge to concentration over such a long period. You might find yourself rereading the same short passage from the exemplar multiple times before its meaning fully registers, or catching yourself about to make a careless error, skipping a line, miscopying a word. This is when the discipline truly kicks in, the conscious effort to pull your attention back, again and again, to the minute details of the script before you. The endless sea of text can feel overwhelming, your progress a tiny ripple on its surface. But each completed line, each finished page, is a tangible achievement, a small victory against the encroaching weariness and the fading light. The afternoon wears on, each stroke of your quill a small victory against the tide of the text and your own encroaching fatigue. You're in that state of focus monotony, your hand moving with a rhythm honed by hours, days, years of practice. The light from the window is beginning to take on a warmer, softer hue, a signal that the working day is slowly winding down, but there are still precious minutes, perhaps even an hour or more, of usable daylight left. Your mind is perhaps not as sharp as it was this morning, the letters on the exemplar might seem to blur just a fraction more easily. And then, it happens. Perhaps your eye skips a line in the exemplar, only to realize it a sentence later. Perhaps a word is muddled in your mind as it travels from the exemplar to your own page. Or maybe, in a moment of distraction caused by a particularly insistent ache in your shoulder, your hand twitches, sending a small, errant trail of ink where it shouldn't be, a tiny, dark spiderweb on your otherwise neat page. It could be an omission, a repetition, a misspelling, or an unsightly blot. Whatever its form, the moment you spot it, a cold knot forms in your stomach. That feeling is probably worse than discovering the cheese you had for your meager midday morsel was, in fact, a cleverly disguised piece of tallow soap. All that work, that careful preparation of the parchment, the meticulous ruling, the hours of painstaking script, and now this. This blot, this error, this tiny monument to human fallibility. The initial reaction is a silent groan, a wave of frustration. Your carefully cultivated flow is shattered. The pressure to maintain accuracy is immense, not just for the integrity of the text, but also because parchment is a precious, expensive commodity. Wasting a whole sheet due to an unfixable error is a costly mistake, one that would earn you the disapproval of the armarius and perhaps affect your standing or, if you're a commercial scribe, your payment. Now, you must engage in the delicate, tedious art of correction. The methods available to you are varied, depending on the nature and severity of the error. For a significant mistake, like a miscopied word or a blot, the most common solution, and a mainstream historical fact of scribal practice, is erasure. This isn't like hitting a backspace key. This requires your trusty penknife, the same one you use to sharpen your quills. You must very, very carefully begin to scrape away the offending ink. The goal is to remove the ink layer without unduly damaging the parchment surface, without making it too thin, and certainly without tearing it. It's like performing microsurgery on a very sensitive patient or trying to diffuse a very tiny, very sensitive bomb made of animal skin. Each scrape is minute, controlled. You hold your breath, your focus absolute. The ink, especially iron gall ink, has already begun to bind with the parchment fibers, so it doesn't lift away easily. You are essentially removing the very top layer of the skin itself. Once the ink is gone, or as much of it as you can safely remove, the area will be rough, slightly abraded. It won't accept new ink well in this state. So, you must then prepare the erased spot. You might burnish it with a smooth, hard object, a piece of polished bone, ivory, or even a smooth stone, to flatten the raised fibers and restore some of its smoothness. Sometimes, a little chalk or pounce might be rubbed into the area to help the new ink adhere properly. Only then can you attempt to write the correction, trying to match the size and style of the surrounding script as closely as possible. The corrected area, however, often remains visible to a discerning eye. The parchment might be slightly thinner there, or the new ink might sit a little differently on the treated surface. If the error is minor, perhaps a single incorrect letter that can be subtly altered into the correct one, you might attempt that with a few deft strokes. Or, for a word that is wrong but doesn't disrupt the spacing too much, you might use expunctuation. This involves placing small dots or points directly beneath, or sometimes above, each letter of the erroneous word. These expunctual dots are a signal to the reader to disregard the marked letters. It's a neat, unobtrusive method, a kind of visuals never mind. It's a quirky, specific kind of scribal shorthand. For an omitted word or a short phrase, you might write it in very small letters in the space above the line where it should have appeared, using a small caret mark, like an upside-down V, below the line to indicate the point of insertion. If the omission is longer, you might have to write it in the margin, with a corresponding reference mark, a sine de renvoi, both in the text and next to the marginal addition to link them. These marginalia can sometimes become quite elaborate, with little lines or symbols guiding the reader's eye. Sometimes, a scribe might simply write hic doest aliquid, something is lacking here, or, more laconically, va. Cat, it is wanting empty here, in the margin, especially if they are unsure of the exact missing text or if space is tight. The extent to which minor errors, such as slight variations in regional spelling or the inconsistent use of common abbreviations, were tolerated by patrons or scriptorium masters, versus the rigorous expectation of almost photographic reproduction, likely varied considerably. This depended on factors like the perceived sacredness or legal importance of the text being copied, and the specific quality standards of the individual scriptorium or commissioner. Some texts demanded absolute fidelity, others might have allowed for a little more leniency, as long as the meaning was preserved. Whether the original scribe was almost always responsible for correcting their own immediate errors, or if a dedicated corrector or supervisor systematically reviewed the work at a later stage for more subtle mistakes or to compare it against the exemplar, is a question with varying answers across different manuscript production contexts and periods. In many cases, you are your own first line of quality control. The penknife, your constant companion, has probably seen more corrective action than a stern headmaster dealing with unruly pupils. Each correction, regardless of the method, takes time. It breaks your rhythm, demands a different kind of focus, and adds to your overall workload. There's also the psychological sting of having made the error in the first place, especially when you're tired and the end of the working day feels both near and far. Some scribes, perhaps to vent their own frustrations or to implore future users to be careful, would occasionally include what are known as scribal curses in the colophon at the end of a book. These could range from gentle pleas for the book's preservation to dire warnings against theft, mutilation, or, indeed, the introduction of further errors by careless future copyists. It's a testament to how seriously they took their work, and how frustrating the introduction of errors could be. You finish your correction, whatever form it took. You survey the result. Perhaps it's a neat, almost invisible mend. Perhaps it's a little more obvious, a small scar on the page that will forever testify to this moment. You take a breath, try to shake off the lingering annoyance, and prepare to dive back into the textual sea. The flow of words awaits, and the day is not yet done. Each corrected error is a small battle won, a testament to your diligence in the face of imperfection. The aftermath of the error and its painstaking correction leaves a subtle residue of tension in your shoulders, a heightened awareness of the potential for mistakes. You settle back into the rhythm of copying, your world once again defined by the steady, dark lines of your iron gall ink on the pale, creamy surface of the parchment. It's a monochrome existence, this scribal life, a landscape painted in shades of black, brown, and the varying hues of animal skin. The most vibrant color you typically encounter on a daily basis might be the slightly alarming red of an inflamed knuckle from gripping your quill too tightly, or perhaps the off-yellow of a particularly old sheet of parchment that's seen better days. But then, perhaps as you glance up to rest your strained eyes for a fleeting moment, or as you carry a completed quire to the armarius, you catch a glimpse of something else. A flash of vibrant color. It might be on another desk in a different, perhaps better lit, part of the scriptorium where a different kind of artisan works. Or it could be on a set of nearly finished pages, awaiting binding, where the text you or another scribe so carefully laid down is now adorned with breathtaking additions. This is the realm of the illuminator, the miniaturist, a world away from your focused, textual labor, yet intimately connected to it. If your scriptorium is large or wealthy enough to employ such specialists, you might see them at their meticulous work. Their desks are different, perhaps flatter and littered not with the simple tools of a text scribe, but with an array of tiny pots and shells holding brilliant pigments, fine brushes made from the delicate hairs of squirrel or stoat tails, polished agate or hematite burnishes for making gold leaf gleam, and small knives for manipulating the precious gold. Their task is to bring light, quite literally, as illuminate means to light up, to the page, transforming a utilitarian text into a dazzling work of art. The colors they use are a treasure trove, a stark contrast to your sensible, hard-working black ink, which you might consider the older, more serious sibling in the family of scriptorium materials. The illuminator's pigments are the flamboyant, artistic younger siblings. There's the brilliant vermilion, a rich red made from cinnabar, or the more common and cheaper minim, red lead, which gives rubricated initials their name. Blues might range from the more affordable azurite, a copper carbonate mineral, to the legendary ultramarine. This latter, a deep, celestial blue made from painstakingly grinding lapis lazuli stone, which, as a quirky but well-known historical fact, was imported all the way from distant Afghanistan, was incredibly expensive, often worth more than its weight in gold. Its use was typically reserved for the most significant elements of an illumination, such as the robes of the Virgin Mary or Christ, instantly signaling the immense value and prestige of the manuscript. You can't just slap ultramarine around like it's common house paint, it's the medieval equivalent of a designer label, a mark of true luxury. Then there are the greens, perhaps verdigris, a vibrant but sometimes corrosive pigment made by treating copper with vinegar, or the more stable green earth or malachite. Yellows could come from the toxic but bright orpiment, arsenic sulfide, or the more gentle, fragrant, and also quite costly saffron. Lead white provided opaque highlights, and carbon black, the same base as some writing inks, was used for outlines and shading. These pigments weren't usually bought ready to use like modern tube paints. They often came as raw minerals, earths, or other substances that the illuminator or their assistants would have to grind finely with a muller on a slab, then carefully mix with a binder. A common binder was glaire, made from whisked and settled egg white, which gave the colors a beautiful luminosity and adherence to the parchment. Gum arabic, your familiar friend from ink making, was also used. The division of labor is a key aspect of manuscript production, a mainstream historical understanding. You, the scribe, painstakingly write the text, leaving carefully measured blank spaces for any planned decoration. This might be a gap for a large initial at the beginning of a chapter, a wider margin for a decorative border, or a rectangular box where a miniature, a small illustration, will later be painted. The illuminator then takes over these completed text pages, filling in those reserved spaces with their vibrant artistry. Whether the same individual commonly performed both proficient textual scribing and high-quality artistic illumination, especially for the most elaborate and skilled work, is a subject of ongoing discussion among manuscript scholars. While some multi-talented individuals certainly existed, particularly in smaller or less specialized scriptoria, the general trend, especially for luxury manuscripts, was towards specialization. The skills required were distinct, the calligrapher's rhythmic precision versus the painter's delicate control of color and form. You watch them, perhaps, from a respectful distance, or you see their finished work. The gleam of burnished gold leaf, so bright it seems to capture the very sunlight, the intricate floral patterns coiling around the margins, the jewel-like intensity of the colors in a tiny scene depicting a saint's life or a biblical event. It's a world of breathtaking beauty, a sharp contrast to the disciplined austerity of your own black-on-parchment pages. There might be a twinge of something, not quite envy, perhaps, but a wistful appreciation for that explosion of color. If you tried to handle gold leaf, you imagine you'd probably end up looking like a poorly gilded, very frustrated statue, with expensive fragments stuck to your nose and eyebrows. Or perhaps, in your particular scriptorium, there are no illuminators. Perhaps the books produced here are purely textual, valued for their content and the clarity of their script rather than for decorative splendor. In this case, the glimmer of color is something you only dream of, something you've seen in a magnificent gospel book from a wealthier monastery or a nobleman's psalter that once passed through your scriptorium for study. You imagine the vivid hues, the painstaking application of gold, the stories told not just in words but in images. It serves as a reminder that the world of books extends beyond your daily, monochrome reality, even if your own contribution is the vital, foundational text upon which all else is built. Your work is the strong, plain architecture, theirs is the stained glass that floods it with light and story. The fading afternoon light catches the edge of your own page, perhaps highlighting a particularly well-formed sequence of letters, your own quiet, unadorned artistry. There's a different kind of beauty here, a beauty of order, of clarity, of knowledge patiently transcribed. Your black ink may not shimmer like gold, but it carries the weight of worlds, the echoes of history, the foundations of faith or reason. And as the day draws nearer to its close, you turn back to that familiar, demanding, and deeply essential task, leaving the dreams of dazzling color for another, perhaps sleepier, moment. The light, your steadfast but ultimately finite partner in this daily endeavor, is now truly beginning to fail. The warm, golden hues of late afternoon have deepened into the dusky mauves and grays of early evening. Shadows that were once distinct and sharp now blur and merge, swallowing the corners of the scriptorium and creeping across your desk. The meticulously ruled lines on your parchment are becoming harder to distinguish, the fine details of the exemplar's script a challenge for your tired eyes. To continue working in such dim conditions would be to invite error, to undo the careful labor of the preceding hours. It's time to bring the day's writing to a close. There might not be an official pronouncement, no bell to signal tools down. It's more an unspoken consensus, a collective acknowledgement among the scribes that the natural limit has been reached. You see other heads lifting from their work, shoulders stretching, the faint sounds of activity shifting from the rhythmic scratch of quills to the more varied noises of packing up. You yourself decide on a good stopping point, perhaps the end of a sentence, or a paragraph, or a particularly convenient spot on the page. You carefully mark your place in both your copy and the exemplar, ensuring you can pick up the thread seamlessly tomorrow morning. A small, dry piece of scrap parchment tucked between the leaves, or a weighted bookmark, will do the trick. You lean back for a moment, a genuine, bone-deep sigh escaping your lips. It's a sigh of fatigue, certainly, but perhaps also tinged with a quiet sense of accomplishment. You look over the expanse of text you've managed to produce today. A page, perhaps two, maybe more if the script was simpler or your endurance particularly high. Each letter, each word, a testament to hours of focused effort. It might not look like much against the backdrop of the entire volume you're tasked with, but it's progress, tangible and real. Now begins the crucial end-of-day ritual, putting your precious tools to rest. This isn't a casual tossing of implements into a drawer, it's a careful, almost reverent process. Your quills, having served you faithfully, or sometimes frustratingly, throughout the day, require immediate attention. You take the quill you were last using and meticulously wipe away every trace of excess ink from the nib and barrel, using a soft linen rag or a designated piece of scrap parchment. If left to dry, the iron gall ink would clog the delicate slit and harden on the point, rendering the quill useless until laboriously cleaned or recut. Some scribes might give the nib a quick rinse in a small pot of water kept for this purpose, though this practice varied. The key is to ensure the nib is clean and dry. You inspect the point one last time, it's likely worn down from the day's writing and will need resharpening first thing in the morning. You treat all your working quills this way. It's like tucking your tiny, feathery employees into bed after a hard shift. They've earned their rest. Some scribes, as a quirky but practical habit, might have specific ways of storing their best quills, perhaps in a simple wooden case or with their nibs slightly elevated, to protect the delicate points and help maintain the feather's natural curve and springiness. Next, your ink pot. This dark well of potential needs to be securely sealed. You place the cap, be it a wooden plug, a twist of leather, or a fitted ceramic lid, firmly onto the pot. This prevents the precious ink from evaporating, from becoming contaminated with dust, and, most importantly, from any catastrophic spills that could ruin hours, or even days, of work on nearby parchments. It's like carefully sealing away a mischievous genie, left open, that ink could wreak havoc overnight. The exact methods used by scribes to prevent their iron gall ink from freezing solid in unheated scriptoria during the harsh depths of winter are not always clearly detailed in historical sources. This is a point of some discussion, with speculation ranging from the use of insulated wooden boxes for the ink pots, to keeping them near any residual warmth from other, more heated parts of the monastery or dwelling, or even specific antifreeze additives like wine being more crucial in colder climes. Tonight, the air is merely cool, not yet dangerously frigid, but the habit of careful sealing is ingrained. Then there's the parchment itself. The sheets you've worked on today, filled with your fresh script, are vulnerable. You gather them carefully, ensuring your hands are clean. You might place them between protective wooden boards, or within a simple portfolio, or perhaps they are to be added to a stack of completed quires in a designated press or cupboard. The aim is to keep them flat, clean, and safe from dampness, rodents, a constant threat in old buildings, and accidental damage. The exemplar, too, that master copy from which you work, must be treated with the utmost respect. If it's your personal responsibility, you return it to its proper, secure storage place. More likely, especially if it's a particularly valuable or unique text, the armarius or librarian would be responsible for its overnight security. Whether individual scribes were primarily responsible for the daily security and overnight storage of the valuable exemplars they were actively working on, or if this responsibility always fell strictly to the armarius, likely varied significantly depending on the scriptorium's size, wealth, and internal regulations. Finally, you tidy your personal workspace. Your penknife, ruler, pumice stone, pounce pot, erasing shield if you use one, all your small, essential tools are gathered and stored neatly, perhaps in a wooden box or a leather roll that you keep by your desk. You brush away any fine parchment dust or stray crumbs from your desk surface. There's a quiet satisfaction in restoring order, a sense of completion to the day's cycle. Your desk, after this tidying, looks deceptively peaceful, giving no hint of the intense labor, the tiny dramas of error and correction, or the sheer mental and physical effort that unfolded upon it throughout the day. Around you, other scribes are engaged in similar rituals. The scriptorium, which hours ago was filled with the subtle but persistent sound of writing, is now filled with the softer, more varied sounds of tools being wiped, lids being secured, and cupboards gently closing. There's a shared, unspoken understanding in these movements, the quiet choreography of a day's work ending. The symbolic act of closing the book, both literally for the texts and metaphorically for the day's efforts, brings a sense of definite pause, a commitment to disengage and recuperate before returning to the task on the morrow. The light outside has now almost completely surrendered to the evening, and the scriptorium is sinking into a deep, restful gloom, its purpose fulfilled for another day. With your tools meticulously cleaned and stored, and your small corner of the scriptorium returned to a state of quiet order, you are finally ready to leave. Perhaps you are among the last to depart, the heavy door of the scriptorium groaning softly as you pull it shut behind you, the sound echoing momentarily in the now near-empty chamber. The day's work is done. Or rather, this portion of the endless work is done. You step out from the relative stillness of the scriptorium into the embrace of the early evening. The air is noticeably cooler now, carrying the dampness of the approaching night. It feels fresh against your skin, a contrast to the somewhat close atmosphere where you've spent so many hours. The sounds of the world are different too. The sharp, focused noises of the scriptorium give way to the more diffuse sounds of a medieval town or monastic close settling down for the night. You might hear the distant, mournful lowing of cattle already in their byres, the barking of a dog, the clatter of wooden shutters being closed and barred. The smell of wood smoke from evening cooking fires is more pronounced, mingling with the ever-present scent of damp earth and the general miasma of medieval life. Your journey home is the reverse of your pre-dawn trek, yet it feels entirely different. Then, you were moving towards the day's labor, perhaps with a sense of anticipation or at least resigned readiness, your body relatively rested. Now, every step is weighted with the accumulated fatigue of the long hours. Your back, which protested earlier, now screams in a dull, constant throb. Your neck is stiff, your shoulders ache, and your writing hand feels like a claw, the ghost of the quill still imprinted in its grip. Your eyes, strained from hours of focusing in imperfect light, feel gritty and tired, welcoming the relative darkness. This homeward trudge is less a stroll in the park and more a zombie apocalypse shuffle, albeit one fueled by the noble pursuit of preserving knowledge and perhaps the less noble but equally pressing need for sleep. Navigating the streets or pathways in the growing darkness is once again a challenge. Medieval streets, as we know, were generally unlit. If there's a moon, its pale light might offer some guidance, casting familiar buildings into stark relief and deepening the shadows in alleys and doorways. Otherwise, you rely on your intimate knowledge of the route, every pothole, every uneven stone, every treacherous puddle memorized from countless similar journeys. It's like navigating a complex escape room where the prize isn't a key, but the simple comfort of your own cold bed. You might not be entirely alone. Other figures flit through the gloom, fellow workers heading home, servants running late errands. Perhaps you see the first of the night watchmen beginning their rounds. These men, a common feature of medieval urban security, patrolled the streets to guard against fires, a constant peril in towns built largely of wood, to deter wrongdoers, and to enforce the curfew. A mainstream historical fact is that curfews were common in most towns and cities, requiring law-abiding folk to be indoors after a certain hour, usually signaled by a town bell. The rhythmic clang of the curfew bell might even be sounding as you walk, a somber reminder to hasten your steps. Whether the enforcement of these curfews was universally strict for all inhabitants, or if individuals in certain recognized professions, like yourself returning from a long day of essential scribal duty, were tacitly permitted more leeway, remains a topic not always clearly defined in surviving civic ordinances. You hope, for your sake, it's the latter. The calls of the night watchman, a quirky and often reassuring sound in the medieval urban night, might echo through the streets later on, all's well, and the clock strikes 9, or similar pronouncements, marking the passage of the dark hours and offering a thin veneer of security. For now, however, the streets might be in that transitional phase, not yet fully deserted, but with a sense of doors being bolted and the public world receding. Sounds drift from the houses you pass, the muffled murmur of voices, perhaps the sound of a lute or a simple song if a household is feeling musical, the cry of a baby. Or there might just be silence, families already gathered around their hearth, their activities curtailed by the darkness and the cost of candles or oil for lamps. The degree of social interaction or communal activity that occurred within ordinary households after dark, once the main work of the day was done, is a subject of ongoing historical inquiry, often constrained by the limited and costly nature of artificial lighting which would have restricted many pastimes. If your path takes you through monastic grounds, the atmosphere is different again. Here, the rhythms of the liturgical hours continue. You might hear the solemn chanting of Compline, the final prayer office of the day, drifting from the chapel, a beautiful, ethereal sound that speaks of peace and the divine. The cloister arches are deep pools of shadow, the air still and cool. Your body aches with a profound weariness. Each step requires conscious effort. Your brain, after hours of intense concentration on complex texts and minute letter forms, feels as though it has officially clocked out for the day and is now running on emergency backup power only. Thoughts are slow, perhaps a jumble of half-formed letters, snippets of the text you copied, and the overwhelming desire for rest. You are not just physically tired, you are mentally drained, the cognitive demands of your work as taxing as any physical labor. Finally, through the gloom, you recognize the familiar silhouette of your own dwelling. Perhaps a faint, warm light flickers from a window if your family or housemates are still awake and can afford the candle. The sight, however humble, is a beacon. It promises an end to the day's toil, a respite from the cold and the darkness, the comfort of the familiar, however basic. The anticipation of removing your dusty, travel-stained outer clothes, of perhaps a sip of something warm if you're lucky, and the profound relief of finally stretching out your aching limbs on your straw pallet is almost overwhelming. You reach your door, fumbling for the latch or key if you have one. The day's journey, from the cold pre-dawn to this weary return in the deepening night, is almost complete. The endless textual sea has been navigated for another day, its currents of ink charted, its shores of parchment filled. Now, all that remains is to find what little comfort home can offer and surrender to the oblivion of sleep, hoping to gather enough strength to face it all again when the cold dawn inevitably beckons. You push open the door to your dwelling, the familiar creaker welcome sound. The air inside is still cold, but it's a contained cold, lacking the raw, biting edge of the open street. It smells of home, perhaps the lingering aroma of wood smoke from a dying hearth, the faint scent of herbs hung to dry, or simply the close, human smell of a shared living space. If you have family or housemates, there might be a quiet murmur of greeting, a sleepy acknowledgement of your return. Or, if you live a more solitary existence, perhaps within a monastic cell, only silence greets you, a silence that now feels less like the focused hush of the scriptorium and more like a comforting blanket. Your evening routine is as simple and unadorned as your morning one. You shrug off your heavy outer mantle or tunic, the garment carrying the dust and grime of the day, and perhaps the faint, lingering scent of the scriptorium, that unique blend of parchment, ink, and old knowledge. You shake it out, maybe hang it on a peg. There's no luxurious hot bath awaiting you, no leisurely wind down with a good book, you've had quite enough of those for one day, albeit in a different capacity. You might approach the water basin, the same one from this morning, its contents likely still numbingly cold. A quick splash on your hands and face, an attempt to wash away the day's labor, though the faint stains of ink around your fingernails and perhaps a smudge on your cheek might prove more stubborn. It's less about hygiene as your descendants would understand it, and more about a ritual cleansing, a symbolic shedding of the workday. You change into your simple sleeping tunic, the coarse linen or wool feeling familiar against your skin. Perhaps there's a last, very small morsel of food left from an earlier meal, another piece of bread, a cold leftover, which you might consume standing up, too weary to make an occasion of it. A sip of water or flat ale to wet your dry throat. There's no elaborate evening meal being prepared, no bright lights by which to read or socialize. The day's energy has been spent, and the costly candles or oil lamps are reserved for necessity, not leisure. Your main form of evening entertainment is the compelling prospect of oblivion. And then, the final destination, your bed. Your straw-filled pallet, which seemed so uninviting in the cold darkness of the pre-dawn, now beckons with an almost irresistible allure. It's not a luxury mattress by any stretch of the imagination, it's more like the lumpy embrace of 1,000 tiny, insistent pokes, but it represents rest, and right now, rest is the most precious commodity in your world. The extent to which medieval people actively analyzed their dreams for specific prophetic meaning, beyond very general religious interpretations of good or evil omens, is a complex area of cultural and psychological history, with sources often being scarce or deeply allegorical. For you, any dream that doesn't involve chasing runaway letters or deciphering an impossible exemplar would probably be considered a good one. You make your way to it, each step an effort. The floorboards are cold under your bare feet. You lift the rough woolen blanket, your shield against the night's chill, and slide onto the rustling straw. The familiar scent of it, dry and slightly dusty, rises to meet you. As you settle, every ache and pain from the long day makes its presence known with renewed vigor. Your back, your neck, your shoulders, your cramped fingers, they all throb in a dull, unified chorus of complaint. Sleep isn't just rest, it's the only period where your body gets to lodge its formal protests without your conscious mind trying to override them with the demands of work. Your hands, even after washing, might feel subtly stiff, the memory of gripping the quill for hours still etched into their posture. You might even catch the faint, metallic tang of iron gall ink if you bring your fingers near your face, a persistent reminder of your craft. This is ink-stained slumber, quite literally. Closing your eyes doesn't immediately bring darkness and peace. Instead, images from the day flicker behind your eyelids, the intricate curves of the letters in the exemplar, the point of your quill hovering over the parchment, the ruled lines stretching into the distance, perhaps the unsettling image of that error you had to painstakingly correct. Snippets of text, half-formed words, might drift through your mind, a kind of mental word salad that your brain is far too tired to toss properly. It's as if the scriptorium itself has imprinted itself onto your consciousness and is reluctant to release its hold. Many people in medieval times, a well-documented aspect of their daily life and faith, would say specific prayers before sleep. These weren't just expressions of piety, they were also for protection against the terrors of the night, against evil spirits, bad dreams, or the very real fear of sudden, unprepared death in one's sleep. You might murmur your own accustomed prayer, a familiar comfort in the darkness, a plea for safe passage through the vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. Some folk practices also involved the use of calming herbs like lavender or hops, perhaps stuffed into a small pillow or sachet and placed near the head to encourage restful sleep, though this was more likely a rural or household remedy than a standard scriptorium provision. The sounds of your dwelling settle around you. The sigh of the wind outside, the distant creak of the house settling, the soft breathing of anyone who shares your sleeping space. Whether the often communal sleeping arrangements in less affluent households, where families or multiple unrelated individuals might share a room or even a large bed for warmth, genuinely offered more of a comforting sense of security against the night's perceived dangers, or were primarily a source of constant minor disturbances and an utter lack of privacy, is a question open to some interpretation by social historians. For you, any sound that isn't the scratching of a quill or the stern voice of the armarius is probably a welcome change. Slowly, very slowly, the mental images begin to fade. The aches in your body start to recede into a duller background throb. The sheer weight of your exhaustion pulls you downwards, into the deep well of sleep. The day's toil, the endless textual sea, the cramps and chills, the fleeting glimpses of color, the meticulous care of your tools, it all begins to dissolve. Your breathing deepens, becomes more regular. The ink-stained world of the medieval scribe finally releases you to the temporary oblivion you so desperately need. You drift, sinking into the quiet darkness, gathering strength for the inevitable moment when the cold dawn will once again beckon, and the silent, demanding pages will await your hand. And so, you rest. The deep, profound rest of a body and mind pushed to their limits, a rest earned through hours of unwavering focus and patient craft. The last echoes of the scriptorium, the ghost of the quill in your hand, the phantom scent of ink and parchment, all begin to soften, to recede into the quiet landscape of your slumber. The chill of your small room is still there, a constant presence, but in the depths of your weariness, it too loses some of its sharpest bite, absorbed into the greater need for oblivion. Let the gentle rustle of the straw beneath you become a soothing whisper, a lullaby from an ancient time. Feel the tension slowly uncoiling from your shoulders, from your neck, from your tired, ink-stained fingers. Each breath you take is a little deeper now, a little slower, drawing you further away from the day's demands, further into the peaceful embrace of the night. The world outside your small dwelling continues its nocturnal turn, the moon casting its pale light, the stars wheeling silently overhead, but here, in this small space, there is only the profound stillness of your repose. There are no more lines to rule, no more letters to form with painstaking precision. The exemplar is closed, the ink is capped, the tools are quiet. All the tiny anxieties of the day, the fear of error, the pressure of the task, the discomfort of the cold, can now be laid aside, like a heavy cloak shrugged off at the end of a long journey. Allow yourself to drift on this peaceful tide, knowing that the work is done, for now. The pages you fill today will wait, patiently, for the new dawn. Imagine the deep silence of the medieval night, a silence far more profound than most of us can easily conceive, punctuated only by the soft sounds of nature or the distant call of a watchman. Let that silence envelop you, a comforting, protective presence. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to think about, except the gentle rise and fall of your own breath, the feeling of letting go, sinking deeper and deeper into a restorative, peaceful slumber. The day's drudgery, with its quiet sighs and its subtle triumphs, fades into the soft darkness. Sweet dreams.